A lot of the times people open a pop-up in their strongest season, so it's a little bit of a skewed point of view of success. Sometimes you might have really strong data that this is a really strong city for us, is where we show up, but maybe you showed up in the wrong neighborhood within that city. Maybe you think that malls is your avenue, but actually it's a high street. So there's a lot that you can test and learn through that vehicle of pop-ups, and there's a spectrum of use cases.
You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Welcome back to Retail Disrupted, where every week we speak to the leaders and disruptors shaping the future of retail. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Melissa Gonzalez, author, entrepreneur, podcast host, and design strategist. As principal at MG2, Melissa has shaped over 150 immersive brand experiences for startups and Fortune 500 companies. And not only that, she has just released a new book called The Purpose Pivot: How Dynamic Leaders Put Vulnerability and Intuition into Action. Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to have the conversation today.
Me too. And I know you have been so busy with your new book. I know you've been on TV, you've been featured in all kinds of articles and doing events. So it's really great to grab some time with you. And I should say right off the bat that I am a huge fan of your work. I follow your
Thank
posts
you.
on LinkedIn. I follow your podcast, which for our listeners is called Retail Refined. And I would definitely
Yes.
recommend that you go and subscribe.
Thank
So
you.
you're very welcome. So, Melissa, just to kick things off, I know I've just read out your bio, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey?
My professional journey is definitely, I think, non-linear. But I started my career after college on Wall Street, working in institutional equity sales. So really spent, years working with companies that were either going public or doing secondaries, and really understanding their story, what their value proposition was, their differentiators, and our job was to give advice to investors. And so um, it was a big chunk of my career in the beginning. And then I pivoted for the first time when I left Wall Street to start the Lioness Group. And that really was just an evolution of me having that history of, studying brands and seeing what makes them work and investable or not. And then adding more of a creative layer to that, by helping fast growing digital natives who were coming to physical retail for the first time figure out how to tell their story in physical environments. They had, proven concept, ready to scale, and this was the next leg of that, but not necessarily their core expertise. And then fast forward, then the Lioness Group was acquired by MG2. I became a principal and shareholder of the firm there. And that was really to expand our value proposition to our clients and being able to layer in additional expertise on top of, what we had built at the Lioness Group. And now at the end of last year, we were acquired again by Colliers Engineering and Design, which is owned by Colliers. So now it's an even further expansion of what we can bring to our clients, whether it's, location number one, or they're really, scaling on a national or even international level.
Yeah, interesting. So, we're going to dive into retail and talk about those digitally native brands and how they're craving physical retail. That's definitely a firmly kind of entrenched trend at the moment. But first, I'd love to hear more about your new book, The Purpose Pivot.
Yeah.
Now, from what I understand, this started from a pretty scary place because you had a life threatening medical emergency. Can you tell us what happened and then how it inspired you to write the book?
Yeah. So it really was after over a year of my body kind of giving me signals and talking to me to let me know that everything wasn't okay. But I noticed the marked change at the end of 2022, a big energy shift. I wasn't as enthusiastic as I had been just popping out of bed, just a little bit more lethargic. And that started to then evolve into episodes of vertigo. And I had my first experience with shingles. And then by the end of the year, really could go a full week without having a bowel movement. And so really just feeling bloated and tired and not myself. And so while I started to talk about it, I actually wrote it down by the end of the year. I was going to do this Better You challenge with my family. I was going to focus on better gut health. We were going to start this challenge on January 10th, and it was going to be, about my gut health. I didn't know how. I thought maybe a cleanse. But, I recognize it so much so that I went from talking about it to really writing it down. Fast forward to January 10th, the date that I wrote down on that piece of paper. That is when I was on a business trip in Seattle and was jolted out of my sleep in this excruciating pain. Um, and it kind of escalated into really feeling like I was in full blown labor and being rushed to the ER with a colleague, and told that I needed to go into emergency surgery for my gut. And if I hadn't gone into emergency surgery, I could go into septic shock, which is life
My
threatening.
gosh. Wow.
And so, when you have those crucible moments, they make you stop. At least for me, it did, and say, I knew I wasn't okay. Like, I was talking about it. I wrote it down, like,
Yeah.
but I didn't make it my mission to solve for it. It
Yeah.
wasn't my top priority.
Just because you were
Um,
so busy with kind of everyday
I
life
was
and
busy, and, I think in retrospect, I've done a lot of conversations and stuff like that, and, like, why do you do that? And I think all people kind of power through. I think, and then layer on, like, being a woman, when those physical ailments happen, like, I look at my 8-year and 10-year-old now daughter, like, you know, we get our periods and we get cramps and we get these things and we get nausea,
yeah,
like, since childhood. So you just power through those things,
you
you
do,
just think it's like,
definitely.
oh, it's that time of the month or it's that thing. And so,
Yeah.
it was probably a little bit of that mentality.
Mm,
Um, and, I had done some things, but, got like basic level blood work and stuff like that. But I really didn't, I guess, I wasn't relentless in saying like, no, I'm actually not okay. Um, and so this to me was okay. There was an intervention that happened, and I'm not going to take that for granted. So that was number one. That made me start kind of writing down things I was thinking and feeling. But then as I was speaking to others or shared it on my Instagram, so many started sharing with me their story of, that time I told you I couldn't meet, it was because I was diagnosed with cancer. Or I once wrote down, I needed a timeout and I ended up having a stroke. I took my body all the way to adrenal failure. And it was all these stories. And most people had never shared those stories before because they didn't want anybody to think they were weak. And
wow.
I thought, well, this is a narrative we need to change because these are definitely not moments of weakness. If anything, we all come out stronger on the other side of this. But there is something that we all can learn from that. And we shouldn't get to those stop you in your tracks, crucible moments before we make better decisions.
Yeah.
So it's not just my story, but it's 35 other women that I talked to in varying degrees. Either, they shared quotes or they shared full on stories, and their learnings from that. And I think
Mm,
we can all learn those better practices and really the message that well-being should not be a side project in your life, not on your career path, not on your leadership journeys. And hopefully younger generations than myself can learn and be a little bit more preventive in how they're creating um, that prioritization in their lives. And the truth of the matter is, I think a lot of the times we don't pause because we think we don't have the time to pause.
mm,
But when you're in that state, you're not performing at your optimal performance anyway. So there's an opportunity to actually unlock more when you put well-being and equal importance to other things in your life.
yeah. And also talking about it and being open. And I mean,
Mhm.
I know you've written a book before, but this one is obviously much more personal. So I think, I guess my experience, like, I don't know if it's an age and experience thing and the kind of the confidence that comes with that, or if it's just society and, everyone is expecting a certain level of authenticity and transparency today. But I think for me, like starting my podcast a few years ago, I felt like before that, I felt like I had two very separate personas, which was personal me and
Mm.
professional me. And
Yeah.
now I feel like that doesn't really, I mean, obviously there are like lines, but I feel like those barriers are kind of breaking down. And I was recently diagnosed with ADHD at age 44.
Mm.
So for me, that was my kind of like, whoa moment. And I wanted to share that with my professional community as well, my professional network. So I do feel that those barriers are kind of breaking down. And I wonder, like you said, you spoke to was it 35 other female execs? Like, were there any common themes, or was there anything that they said that
Yeah.
surprised you?
I mean, the common theme was definitely we all had our bodies talking to us and we didn't really listen. We didn't really stop to make change. And most people, it happened once they hit a wall, that change happens. And so there was that. And then that thought of like, I don't want anybody to know because I don't want people to think like I can't handle it, right? I can't deliver on all the things at my job and everything like that. But once we had the conversations, especially those who had shared really for the first time, the other theme was them really seeing the power of feeling seen, because it wasn't just them being vulnerable to share it with me. I had the responsibility to like write it back and have them proof it. And for a lot of them, it was this emotional kind of unlock of, oh my gosh, like reading it about myself. I can honor it differently. And it brought a comfort level of them now sharing more openly with others. And also the gift of, what that receives back, like, as some of them were putting it out there, now people are talking to them about, "Oh my gosh, I had that as well," or there's this different relatability that you bring, to others when that happens, and so I think that was another really powerful theme that came out of it.
Okay, so let's talk about retail. We know that retail is a dynamic, fast paced industry. It's evolving all the time. We've got online and offline converging. We have e commerce becoming more immersive, and we have physical spaces becoming more experiential and community led. And that is really just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yes.
So, Melissa, what are you seeing? What would you say are the biggest shifts impacting the sector right now?
I think the consumer is and technology are the biggest drivers of the shift for sure, and probably technology is driving the consumer, right? Even the conversation we just had about why people are bringing their personal self. I think social media is good and challenging at the same time, but I think it has opened up like a little bit more of that behind the curtain and that's been an evolution for a long time. And so the lines get blurred a bit about what that looks like. And I do think there's this recognition of really bringing your whole self to everything because life is such an integration, like work life, all of it, right? It's like no
Yeah.
longer talking about balance, it's really integration. But I do think that we're hitting this point where it's a growing hyper awareness of that feeling overextended or feeling burnt or really wanting well being in life. And so, I think you're seeing brands really trying to figure out how to integrate that a little bit more into what they're offering and what the experiences that they're creating are, whether it's partnering with wellness brands themselves or just bringing that mentality of mental wellness and physical wellness, to the platform. And if it's in store, it's like through community building and what are they fostering and how are they fostering that positivity. So I think that that's one it's not new, it's been bubbling, but I think it's going to be a year where it continues to break out. Um, and I think it's gonna show up in a lot of ways through programming, through it could show up through materiality, it could show up in a lot of different ways through design, and the experience. So I think that's a big one. And then overall, I mean, it's not new that people have been gravitating to experiences over just things,
Mhm.
but I think that will continue as well, especially because we continue to just live our life so much behind the screen and wanting a break from that. And I think this younger generation, we're releasing our Gen Alpha Insights report in January. And this younger generation, while they're so technologically fluid, like just the way they go online, offline, online, like just not like without a second thought, it's not novel, it's just how they exist.
Mhm.
As they start to come of age, not as adults, but even as teens. And I think that they're gonna have this desire to really be together in person in a way, wanting more of those in-store or in-person brand experiences. And what in-store looks like is not necessarily about just products, but it's gonna be about other things that allow them to be co-creators with the brand and allow them to have a collaborative partnership with brands. They have an interesting relationship with food and how they want that to show up in experiences too. And so I think it's just going to be a continued evolution. And then with technology, I think we've a lot of fits and starts about how technology shows up in store, and I don't think there's like one cookie cutter answer to that. But I think as consumers and individuals, we've become more and more aware of just the benefits of technology. It's not really thinking about technology in itself, but it's really the the things that it enables that we all kind of now either think as table stakes or want those extra layers. It's going to be even more, how are we bringing that into the experiences? Not what's the tech, but what is it enabling, facilitating?
What does this mean for design, for experiential design? Like how are stores going to evolve to engage consumers across both those physical and digital platforms?
The successful technology is really those that are furthering things that are already organically happening. So, fluidity is, I think, a big aspect of that. They're walking in having, especially this younger generation, right? They've discovered on TikTok or YouTube. And so they have this high level of knowledge already when they're coming in. And so how are you enabling that continuity? And how they're already living that everyday life, right? And access to information, and um, access to the trends, and um, really connecting discovery seamlessly with conversion. So I don't know yet
Mm.
100% how that's going to look like, but those are the aspects that they kind of expect to happen, you know?
Yeah, and I think, like, just to stick with the theme of, social media and the impact that's having on us as consumers, or, the next generation or the generation after, it definitely feels like there is this big social commerce wave, or discovery commerce, as I'm hearing it referred
Mhm.
to more and more. And I think it fits into this bigger trend of e-commerce becoming more immersive, more personalized, more discovery led. And there's also another element here, which is around AI, right? So Gen AI is surfacing very tailored real time recommendations. Agentic AI is going to take that a step further by actually doing the buying for us. And then you also have AI generally just adding more depth and personalization to our e commerce
Yeah.
experiences. So, just a very quick example, I was at a London Tech Week event recently, and all the retailers there were talking about how they're using AI for background imagery. So they're not
Mhm.
using AI generated models because everyone has agreed, that's a step too far.
Yeah.
But to, like, if I'm a luggage brand, I'm not just going to show you a static image of a suitcase and a white a background. I'm going to show you a video of a suitcase being used by a model that is relevant to you, and maybe they're at the airport with a glass of prosecco, and maybe it's an image, maybe it's a video. It's all AI generated. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that suddenly our e-commerce experiences become a little bit more enticing and less transactional. And just to bring this back to what you do, Melissa, like, as e-commerce becomes more engaging, what do you think the impact's going to be on stores? Because already you said that, there's only so much we can get from a screen, and I totally agree with that. But as we look to the future, as our online experiences up their game, like, what does that mean for stores?
I think that that's experiential, and it could take you on this adventure, and it could sell a fantasy and all those things online, but it still will not compensate for that, the tactile, seeing something even visually on a screen versus seeing, I could see you on the screen today, and I could see you tomorrow in person, and I can look in your eyes, and it's gonna have 2 very different experiences.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely.
And so it doesn't fully compensate for that connection that happens, the emotional unlock that is possible when you're in a physical environment. So I think that what happens online fuels discovery for sure. But then it gets bridged when you come into a physical environment, and then you get to smell it, and then you get to touch and feel it, and then you get to talk to somebody about it. Then you get to share that moment with friends in a different way than you would from, a live online chat community. And so I think it's remembering that. And I think that that's why, it's been a long conversation of like, what do we think about when we think about experience per square foot in a store versus sales per square foot in the store, or how much merchandise you could fit on the store. Because I think, more and more people know that they could get drop shipped same day or within hours sometimes, right? Depending on what that partnership that brand has for distribution. And so instead of using up so much of that square foot for that, yes, you don't want to give up any of the impulse purchases. So I think it's not like a one for one in every single kind of product there is. But what's the point of a store? Like what is and if you are at scale and you have a real estate portfolio, that answer could also vary. Like what does that look like? What is the point of your flagship versus your small format versus all these other things? And I think you just have to think about your relationship with the consumer holistically, and then this is just one of your platforms to engage with them.
Yeah. Yeah, because there has been this real proliferation of retail touch points over the past decade or so, and it isn't just, online and offline, but it's also, like we said, it's media, it's social commerce. There's just, so many ways to shop now and to engage with those brands. And something
Yeah.
else I wanted to ask you was about, how online only is no longer enough. It started out as, the O2O trend, online to offline, and there is this recognition that those digitally native brands, those brands that started life online, they recognize the value in having a physical presence, not only because it lets you engage with shoppers in a different way, but there's also the click and collect and returns
Mhm.
angle. There's the
Mhm.
whole, the store is media and the halo effect that it has in terms of driving sales online. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, do you feel that all retailers need some type of physical presence today?
I mean, I think that there's always an opportunity in having that physical presence, but to your point, there's a lot of opportunities in how it happens. It could be through partnership. For a long time, everybody was like, wholesale's dead, and all of that, and then that became a growth strategy for many, right? And so I think that it's an evaluation that you have to take, and what the opportunity is, and kind of also where you're at in your trajectory. Um, Sometimes you're at a point where it makes sense to have your brand owned environments, right? Where you could really immerse people in your story and your value proposition and your service model, all those things. But you haven't really figured out yet maybe your early stages of your brand, and you're still going to go through iterations of branding itself, right? Maybe this is store 1. Before you get to store 10, there's a lot of test and learn that's happening. So to just kind of come out of the gate and say I'm going to open 100, 200, 500, it's probably not realistic, and you really haven't figured out how you're gonna show up fully yet. So maybe it's partly your own destinations that you've validated that these are key markets, to test, to show up, etc. Or it's exemplary of the kind of markets you wanna be in your round 1 of expansion. And then to complement that, what are good partnerships? How are you showing up through partnerships, whether it's shop and shops or pop-ups or whatever it is? Um, and then you have 2 different opportunities to learn too. You're tapping into existing audiences, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's pros and cons to that, because when it's not your own brand experience, then it's not fully you telling the story, somebody else is telling your story. So you have to be really intentional about that and have a really solid filter of what those, um, partnerships look like. How are you training them up to really tell your story and unique value proposition? How's the messaging coming through and all of that? So I don't think it's like a one answer, but I do think there's very, very, very few that I think can exist successfully online only. I mean, they
Mm,
do, it exists, but it's just different. It's a different resonance that you're gonna have.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So let's just pick up on the theme of pop-ups because I know you've created pop-ups for Ariana Huffington, Marc Jacobs, Jay Hilburn. Can you tell us what these brands are looking to achieve with pop-up space, and then how do you go about executing on that vision?
Yeah, so pop-ups have a lot of different use cases. I mean, it could be a marketing moment, right? So really high impact marketing. We did that with Victoria's Secret on the High Line when they repositioned their brand years ago, and it was the first time the brand ever showed up that way. It was a significant, halo effect of getting that message out there of inclusivity, and 4 wedding engagements happened on that backdrop and think of the
No
emotional
way.
connection of that. And, so that's a
Wow.
marketing moment, right?
Yeah.
There's seasonality. So some brands, it doesn't necessarily financially make sense to have doors open 12 months a year, but at some times of the year, it's significantly impactful. And I would say like the example we all know is like the Halloween stores and stuff, right? Like this is their bread and butter time of year. They need physical spaces, but all year long, maybe not. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the test and learn opportunity. So pop up to prototype, so it's like, how are you testing new markets, new formats, new, operational strategy, whatever it is, this is a way to be able to do that. And usually, depending on the use case, your duration will vary. So, if it's high impact marketing, those tend to be shorter term, a few days to a week, sometimes 10 days. But you're going to have big spend on that, right? It's like high impact of substance pop ups. And so that's going to come probably out of a different line item and budget. And then there's those that are really testing the viability of a store. Those, if you want to have, actionable data, you're going to want to be open a little bit longer if possible, up to a year, because then you can study seasonality. A lot of the times people open a pop-up in their strongest season, so it's a little bit of a skewed point of view of success, because of course you did well, you opened during your strongest season, but how do you plan, right, if
Mm.
you don't understand the ebbs and flows that are going to happen throughout the year? Sometimes you might have really strong data that this is a really strong city for us, is where we show up, but maybe you showed up in the wrong neighborhood within that city. Maybe you think that malls is your avenue, but actually it's a high street. So there's a lot that you can test and learn through that vehicle of pop-ups. And, there's a spectrum of use cases.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And when it comes to measuring ROI, because we know this is so important in the current climate, what are some of the metrics that your clients use?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the use case, right? So if it's marketing, it's your ROI is going to be how much engagement did we get? What brand impressions? Did it drive traffic to the website? Sales tend to be secondary, at least short-term sales, because that that's not, this is a marketing initiative. So you want sales, but the person who didn't know us now know us. The person that knew us, are they shopping differently with us? Are they buying more? Are they coming back to the website more frequently? Are they sharing? Have we unlocked fandom? So there's a lot of different metrics that you would use. If it's to test the viability of the store, then it's going to be a little bit more sales driven. But some of those things are going to be similar as well. How many new customers did you acquire? How many converted that only engaged with you online only, but now shopping in store? Does the average cart size look different now? And it gives you an opportunity to, like, things that could get, not the plus one in the cart, but maybe there's certain SKUs that performed better online, but not as, or the opposite, didn't perform well online, but now that people are getting to try it on and they're getting confidence with fit or whatever it is, they now move differently and better when you have a store that can give you some insights about your merchandising strategy. So, there's a lot of different metrics that can be tested.
Melissa, it's been so great having you on the podcast. Thank you for your time, and I will make sure to include a link to your book in the show
Uh,
notes.
Thank you so much. It was so great to speak with you.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.